Wealth inequality in this country is so out of control, and that's one of the many reasons why I introduced my wealth tax in Congress.
As mayor, I believe everyone has a role to play in contributing to our city, and some a little bit more than others.
The choice is clear. It's time to tax the rich.
Saying that the rich in America don't pay their fair share relative to other countries is simply lying. You're just lying to the public. The US is number one, the most progressive tax system. We are substantially more soak the rich, much more progressive than the rest of Europe. Hey there, friends, fans and foes of Dad Saves America. John Papola here, and well, I guess we all survived one of the worst days of the year, Tax Day, April 15th.
It's been a great tax season for the American people.
It has not been a great tax season. It's never a great tax season for the American people, Mr. Secretary.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said Americans are already seeing record refunds as President Trump's new tax breaks start to kick in. According to the Treasury Department, 53 million filers have taken advantage of new enhanced deductions for seniors, no tax on tips, and no tax on overtime. The tax breaks were passed into law by Republicans last July and will result in an estimated $748 increase in refunds for the average American household.
So hopefully you are among the American households who got some of your money back with the tax refund, which could also be looked at as an interest-free loan to Uncle Sam over the course of 2025. That's another way to look at what a tax refund is. It's, oh, here's your money back without interest. However, some Americans, and an increasing number of Americans, are facing a double tax. You could even say in some instances a triple or quadruple tax in after-tax taxing of taxed assets. And nowhere is this becoming more prevalent than in blue states like New York and Mamdani's New York City.
When I ran for mayor, I said I was going to tax the rich. Well, today, we're taxing the rich. I'm thrilled to announce we've secured a pied-à-terre tax, the first in New York's history.
Pied-à-terre tax. So I had to look this up. It doesn't surprise me he's using French because France was the birthplace of communism. A pied-à-terre tax is a foot-on-the-ground tax. It's a tax on basically second homes, homes you don't live in that are not your primary residence. So, you know, of course, it's like most people don't have second homes, so the taxes always start on the targets most likely to have a majority support.
This is an annual fee on luxury properties worth more than $5 million, whose owners do not live full-time in the city. Like for this penthouse, which hedge fund CEO Ken Griffin bought for $238 million.
It just goes without saying that you can just punitively tax your political opponents like conservative donor Ken Griffin. We can just literally point to his home and say we're going to tax him because he's a Republican. That's what it's like. This is rule of law in New York City in 2026, folks. Higher taxes for very particular people. This is as good a time as any to remind you to hit that subscribe button. It helps us reach our goal of hitting 500,000 subscribers. And of course, unlike your taxes, it doesn't actually cost you anything. You just hit that button and keep on playing. And now let's get back to the pain.
This pied-à-terre tax is specifically designed for the richest of the rich, those who store their wealth in New York City real estate, but who don't actually live here. But even so, they're able to reap the huge financial rewards of owning property in, dare I say, the greatest city in the world. And most of the time, these units are sitting empty, since again, they don't actually live here.
Why exactly is it so terrible that some rich person bought some stupid expensive apartment and doesn't live in it or even use it as much as you'd think they would for how expensive it is? What exactly is the burden being applied to New Yorkers? Or isn't that less burden? If you're not in the city, aren't you using less services, less electricity, less water and sewer, less transit, less traffic? You're not there to call the cops. I'm not sure I understand why you're like contemptible for paying New York City taxes while not using New York City services that much. But let's keep going.
This is a fundamentally unfair system that hurts working New Yorkers. Now, it's coming to an end. This tax will raise at least $500 million directly for the city. It'll help fund things like free childcare, cleaner streets, safer neighborhoods. As mayor, I believe everyone has a role to play in contributing to our city, and some a little bit more than others. Happy Tax Day, New York.
One would like to think that Mayor Mamdani is a fringe character that just happened to have gotten elected and is not representative of one of our two major political parties. However, what he's talking about is not a city law, it's a state law. And one that New York State governor said she opposed last summer.
Not raising taxes on people at a time when affordability is the big issue. I'm actually cutting middle class
even on the
taxes.
wealthy.
I don't want to lose any more people to go to Palm Beach.
How are you going to raise taxes if you can't get Democrats to support it?
So I think what we've shown over the last 8 months is our ability to take that which is considered a non-starter and make it seem inevitable.
Take what was a non-starter and make it seem inevitable. I will give the man credit for that. He has certainly moved the Overton window to be directly looking out over fresh hell. If you care about economics or individual liberty or property rights. But yeah, so he has further shifted the Democratic Party to the left, to the radical left, such that the formerly opposing, worried that all of New York's wealthy will move to Boca Raton, Governor Kathy Hochul is now celebrating this punitive, weird extra tax on people who are already paying enormous real estate taxes to the city of New York while not using any of the services. Here, of course, is New York Times saying Hochul proposes tax on New York second homes that are worth $5 million or more. This is how this goes. It's always the seemingly inaccessible, it's not going to hit you, it's just those other people story.
Governor didn't close the door on even more new taxes on the wealthy. At the same time, she says the city must find savings to get its own fiscal house in order, facing a multi-billion-dollar deficit.
So we'll come back to the multi-billion with a B dollar deficit and how $500 million in revenue suddenly funds new stuff when you're still in the hole 5, 10x that. But let's keep going.
But on this day, tax day, Mayor Zohran Mamdani, who barnstormed into office on the backs of chants calling for tax the rich, he's calling it a win.
Those who benefit from the city without living in a full-time capacity should contribute to the costs that it takes to run the city.
And again, they contribute even more because they don't live in the city and don't utilize the city services, but are paying massive real estate taxes. I used to live in New York City. It is monstrous, the amount of taxes you pay. They're paying real estate taxes on the property. It's always like no one's paying their fair share, but they're paying enormous amounts of tax. Anyway, there's plenty of inequality worth being worried about in this country. I don't want to seem like I'm just like kissing up to the uber wealthy. But this is just fundamentally dishonest talk.
The governor has resisted until now Mayor Zohran Mamdani's call to increase taxes on the income of millionaires and corporations, citing concerns that the wealthy tax base would flee New York. Still, the tax on vacation and investment homes is only expected to raise $500 million against at least a $5 billion city budget deficit.
Get that? $5 billion with a B city budget deficit. Now, those numbers are floating around and they're all over the place. Early in January, the comptroller of New York City said that they were facing a $2.2 billion 2026 deficit. So this tax would maybe, in theory, cover a little less than a quarter of that. Again, I don't know where now we're going to have all this new free stuff. Let's see, $500 million. Well, that could do almost 20 grocery stores in Mayor Mamdani's new government-run grocery store scheme, the first of which will cost $30 million and won't be open until 2029. So this is of course the justice that voters in New York City are getting, and they are getting it good and hard. We will be taxing the ultra-wealthy and global elites as if Mr. Mamdani is not literally almost like a toy character of the global elite class. He is like the perfect archetype of the global elite class. The notion that this is just aimed at the rich, the ultra rich, the super hyper mega rich, and isn't part of a fundamental ideology, we know that this isn't true because he's given us the video receipts that this isn't true, that he believes in much more fundamental, radical attacks on everyone.
And ultimately, we're seeing that our vision to tax the top 1% of New Yorkers, these are New Yorkers who make $1 million a year or more, and our proposal is to just tax them by 2% additional, is something that has broad support and will continue to increase that support over the next few months and years.
This is not what he actually wants. He wants taxes on everybody. He must actually want that. But actually, he really wants to tax particular people based on, well, the color of their skin. And he's not shy about it.
We went on your website and realized there's a policy proposal that says your plan, and I'm going to quote it for folks, is to shift the tax burden from overtaxed homeowners in the outer boroughs to more expensive homes in richer and whiter neighborhoods. Explain why you are bringing race into your tax proposal.
That is just a description of what we see right now. It's not driven by race. It's more of an assessment of what neighborhoods are being undertaxed versus overtaxed.
It's clever. I'm just describing reality. White people are richer. I mean, they're not as rich as Asians, but never mind. We don't count them. Yeah, the only problem is one of his first appointments, well, she had a far broader view of how this sort of racial justice approach to property should be handled.
Mayor Zohran Mamdani is sticking with Sia Weaver, the director of the mayor's office to protect tenants. This despite her controversial tweets. Her X account has been deleted. Mamdani announced her appointment right after he was inaugurated on New Year's Day. In 2018, she tweeted, "Seize private property." In another tweet a year later, she called home ownership a weapon of white supremacy.
Ah, yes, that weapon of white supremacy that is owning a home. This is what these people think. This is what he thinks. His actions speak louder than his words, although his words say this stuff too. Her words in the nasally upspeak that is pretty hard to tolerate for my ears because of how diabolical it is. Well, they speak for itself.
I think the reality is that for centuries, we've really treated property as an individualized good and not a collective good. And we are going to transitioning to treating it as a collective good and towards a model of shared equity will require that we think about it differently. And it will mean that families, especially white families, but some POC families who are homeowners as well, are going to have a different relationship to property than the one that we currently have.
In case POC flew by, that's people of color. So everyone but whites, except some people of color that have property, they all have a different relationship. What exactly is this different relationship exactly? Well, we've heard this before in the aftermath of 2020 and the Great Reset from good old technocrat tour de force, the World Economic Forum. They had this to say. This was the new relationship. You know, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. And of course, I know this is somewhat old news and retreading old territory, but it's just worth remembering. All of these people are horrendous hypocrites. All of them. Just a tremendous, like, world-class hypocrisy.
The New York Post reported that Weaver's mother owns a home in Nashville worth about $1.6 million.
Yes. And just if you probably normalize for New York City, her mother's home would probably be worth more like $5 million in New York City, a $1.6 million home in Nashville, just to put that in perspective. Of course, all of this is causing a lot of pain for these blue states and cities.
Meanwhile, New York Governor Kathy Hochul acknowledging that the state's tax base has been heavily impacted by an exodus to low-tax states, urging wealthier residents to come back.
I need people who are high net worth to support the generous social programs that we want to have in our state. But maybe the first step should be go down to Palm Beach and see who you can bring back home, because our tax base has been eroded.
I think that's the worst pitch I've ever heard. I need you to come here so that I can take your money and give it to other people really poorly, really ineffectively, really like 30 million in 4 years to build one grocery store waste. But please do, and please find your other Boca Raton neighbors and Palm Beach neighbors and bring them back north. Please, please bring them back.
Come here. I'm not coming over there. Let's go. Forget it.
Now, according to the most recent IRS service data from 2022 to 2023, due to migration from blue to red states, California lost just under $12 billion and New York $9.9 billion, while Florida gained $20.5 billion and Texas $5.5 billion. Our research are also finding a massive population shift, with data showing from 2024 to 2025, California lost nearly 230,000 residents.
As you'll see throughout this romp around the tax world, one of the most fundamental claims on the pro-big tax, big spending progressive side of the aisle is that these incentives just don't matter that much for the ultra-wealthy. I just don't know how that claim gets treated seriously when the migration data is what it is. And this really is kind of a baffling state of affairs, because what the Wall Street Journal noted is that we're actually getting worse on this front from a policy perspective. Red states, rhetorically small government, definitely lower tax states, Texas, Florida, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and the like, are going even further, pushing tax rates even lower, while the blue states keep pushing them higher and raising revenue per capita while running these massive deficits. It's really kind of bizarre. I'm not really sure where they think this is going to end. But on the way to that end is going to be a lot of pain for these places.
Across the country, at least 10 states are now exploring or have already passed an exit or wealth tax in order to combat revenue losses from residents fleeing to lower tax areas.
Got that? So people are leaving because of the taxes, and the solution is to try to steal their money before they go and raise taxes even higher. Okay.
That includes California, New York, and Michigan.
You tally up the value of your home, your cars, your furniture, your assets, your stocks, your bonds, your art, and there is a tax on that value.
This is the new vanguard. Taxes not merely on income, but on your after-tax income acquired wealth, your stuff, your property, to literally seize your property.
Among the most prominent, California's proposed Billionaire Tax Act, which would impose a one-time 5% tax on the total net worth of anyone worth over $1 billion living in the state, impacting at least 200 people.
And of course, this is always the approach. And it's rhetorically and it's emotionally appealing. It's only 200 people. They're billionaires. Who cares? Taking 5% of a billionaire's assets, net wealth, net total picture, they're still going to be living great. They're still going to have all the things you could possibly want. Of course, it's more complicated than that.
Also, Washington State, who just passed a 9.9% tax on incomes over $1 million. The bill's passage coming around the same time, Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz, who has an estimated net worth of over $3 billion, announced his move to Florida.
Not just move himself down to Florida, but he's moving his entire company, Starbucks, out of the state of Washington.
So the beautiful thing about the United States is that we are these United States. That's actually how it used to be said, not the, but these, plural, because we are this laboratory of 50 sovereign states, although the federal government is too big and dominates us too much these days. But even so, we are seeing that laboratory play out, and people are voting with their feet. But here's the thing. As I'm going to get into more, the targeting of a seemingly narrow group, only 200 billionaires, is a very, very old rhetorical, political strategy that is a lie. And just like Sia Weaver says she wants to seize everyone's property, the people claiming that they only want the tippy top, wealthiest of the wealthy, they want a lot more than that.
The reason they're calling it a billionaire tax is to make it easier for people to vote for it and sign up to this entirely new tax system.
Already, one venture capitalist is estimating the threat of the tax has cost California a whopping $1 trillion as more and more tech giants open shop in more tax-friendly states. PayPal co-founder Peter Thiel, Kraft Ventures co-founder David Sachs, and Oracle CEO Larry Ellison, just to name a few.
Shout out to our boy, Ro Khanna, for driving everybody out of the state.
The proposed measure drawing bipartisan opposition, with Sachs currently serving as the White House AI and crypto czar, writing on social media, after blindly funding the left for years, Silicon Valley is finally realizing what time it is. Dinner time, and they're on the menu.
That is the truth. Now, I realize that Silicon Valley tech titans are not exactly the most sympathetic characters to have in your story, and I get that. and in some cases, such as the AI companies, their relationship with property is kind of interesting because they've trained their models on all publicly available data, which is strange. It opens a whole different world of what is property, and who gets to benefit from the fact that you've trained on everybody else's stuff, everybody else's code and designs and videos and art and writing. Of course, none of those companies are making any money, and they're giving these services away pretty cheap. But I digress.
If there are enough signatures, and this does become a ballot initiative come November, this is driven by a union that is trying to make up what they call a gap in healthcare coverage and costs in the state of California.
And so this is the story behind the story, that this is all a largely government union scheme. This is not the public writ large. This is a narrow public, a special interest, the SEIU, Service Sector Union, essentially they're mobsters. That's what they are. Everywhere you'll find a union, you'll find the actual mafia forever, going all the way back to Jimmy Hoffa. But that's what this is. That's a nice bunch of stuff you got there. I'm going to smash it and take it to put in my pocket.
And that could either be paid one time or it could be paid over 5 years. And it would retroactively, if passed, apply starting January 1st.
So that this is about as fundamental an assault on the concept of rule of law and understanding the rules of the game you're in as ever there was one. To imagine that at the end of this year, you could be told, oh, we just passed a new law and we're stealing your stuff from the beginning of the year. I can't imagine that would survive the courts if the courts still have any function. But the fact that it is tried is really tells you a lot.
Billionaires suck and they will try to divide us.
It's being pushed by a union of healthcare workers who say the funds raised are crucial to save states' failing healthcare system and other programs facing federal cuts, especially after the big, beautiful bill's tax breaks.
The benefit from this tax is going to outweigh, maybe a couple people moving out of the state. And if we don't do anything right now, we are going to see our hospitals close. We're going to see ERs close. And so that's really what this billionaire tax is about.
So my question is, you're going to steal 5% of the people who don't run away's money. You're claiming it's a one-time thing, but you have massive multi-billion-dollar ongoing deficits every year. So why would anyone believe that any of that's true? And why does California, one of the wealthiest economies on planet Earth, why does it need to do this to stop its healthcare system from collapsing? Maybe it's because up to $200 billion of the spending is entirely fraudulent, as we covered last week with the reporting from Chris Rufo and others. Maybe that would be a better place to find savings, is to stop cutting all that money to organized crime syndicates that have produced 2,000 hospice care centers in Los Angeles County alone, when the state of Florida has less than 40 in the whole state. Regardless, this is what they're doing.
And it's being supported by Congressman Ro Khanna, who represents Silicon Valley and has been a tech insider booster.
You build all that wealth, fine, but we've got to have a social contract in this country where the wealth can't just be in the hands of the few. You've got to have some sense that every person, working class families, are going to benefit from that.
So this is a very good distillation of the ideology. And there's probably few people more accessible and goofy at popularizing sort of far left economic gobbledygook, quite like Robert Reich. And he seems like a very nice guy. The documentary about him, it's got bad economics, but he seems genuinely friendly. Former Clinton administration official, was to the left of Clinton even then. Here's how he approaches this.
Billionaires are up in arms about California's proposed wealth tax. Now, here's the truth, and why you should support it. Research shows that when states increase taxes on their richest residents, the vast majority of them stay put, simply because they can afford to. Massachusetts increased taxes on millionaires and billionaires in 2023. What happened? The rich didn't move, and the state generated billions in revenue that's now going to public education and transportation. Why are we focused on the complaints of a handful of billionaires instead of the needs of millions of their neighbors? California's billionaire tax isn't the final answer to America's disgraceful inequalities of wealth and income.
Remember, there's always more. There's no limiting principle for these folks. This isn't the final word. More needs to be done. I have yet to see someone who says, no, this is the final word. We've actually reached peak. We're progressive, not socialist. So this is where we stop and we're not, and that's socialism over there. There's no limiting principle at work on the progressive left between the thing that they're saying isn't just communism and what more needs to be done that's unspecified.
Of course, but it's a start. It may open the way to further efforts to rein in the obscenely rich, which is what some billionaires probably fear. These efforts are essential not only to funding what most people need, but also to preserving our democracy. The choice is clear. It's time to tax the rich.
But it's not socialism. It's definitely not socialism. And if you say it's socialism, you're red scaring from Robert Reich.
I'm going to talk about something that's caused a lot of fear-mongering. You see, advanced countries like the United States pool their resources for the common good. How? Well, governments enact taxes and then spend that money on things that benefit everyone. Think of national defense, schools, highways, healthcare, unemployment insurance, basically government spending that protects the well-being of the people. But since some folk, like your conservative Uncle Bob, think any pooling of resources for the common good is socialism.
Now, this is increasingly like boomer talk because Zohran Mamdani is a proud socialist, a vocal socialist, and he is the vanguard, as is Bernie Sanders and all the rest. So, and the influencer space on the left has folks like Hassan Piker, who just in the past couple weeks went to Yale and said,
the fall of the USSR was one of the greatest catastrophes of the 20th century.
But he pretends that this is all scary propaganda to talk about socialism. This formulation here is just fundamentally dishonest. It is a hide the ball strategy. And I think he knows it. I think he fundamentally knows that he is playing games. One of the other, just to round out the characters who have been advocating for wealth taxes, for the confiscation of property beyond income, already paid for property you bought after tax, is Elizabeth Warren.
Elon Musk has 6.5 million times more wealth than the typical American. If you were to visualize it, this is you and this is Elon Musk. Wealth inequality in this country is so out of control, it's hard to even visualize. And that's one of the many reasons why I introduced my wealth tax in Congress. It's a 2-cent tax on every dollar someone has after they hit the $50 million mark. And then a 3-cent tax on every dollar someone has after they hit the $1 billion mark. You know what we could do with that money? We could make universal child care a reality, build millions of new homes and lower housing costs, lower the Medicare eligibility age to 55, deliver universal paid family leave, establish tuition-free community college, and still have money left over. This is just one way we can start to unrig the economy and lower costs for families. Let's get this done.
We currently are still running a $2 trillion deficit at the federal level. And all of these blue cities and states are running multi-billion, sometimes up to tens of billions of dollar deficits. And yet each new dollar that is talked about with these new taxes goes towards new programs and spending. So just keep that in mind. Just notice that pattern. It is never, we have to balance the budget or we have to at least get to something that could be sustained, like keeping the budget deficit below the rate of growth of the economy, which would be about 2 to 3% of GDP. Nope. It is full Ponzi scheme. Taking in new money, sending it out the door for new stuff, and piling up the debt until there's finally like a crash in the treasury auctions and a financial crisis and sudden radical austerity on all the programs these people claim they care about. Our friend of the show, personal hero of mine, John Stossel, has a great video taking this stuff on.
It's just 5%. You're a rich guy. Why not pay 5%?
You think, oh, it's just 5%, like it's taking 5% out of your checking account. No.
1 million, 2 million. Most of America's wealth isn't like Scrooge McDuck's gold coins sitting in a vault. It's invested in businesses that create products and jobs. Increasing taxes on that also requires an even bigger government to investigate the complex assets.
This also allows government to become more intrusive. Oh, what's that asset you might have in your cellar? We have to send inspectors in to find out where you're hiding the art or the jewelry or whatever.
Why do these rich people need so much money? Don't you want to help the needy?
Yes, and one of the things about the United States, we're the most commercial nation ever invented, but also the most philanthropic nation ever invented. Research shows the American people, when they have more, they give more.
This is very true. This has been well researched. We are the most philanthropic people on planet Earth by a long shot. This goes all the way back to Alexis de Tocqueville's observations about the culture of the United States as it compared to the aristocrats of Europe who simply waited around for their betters to get things to happen, to solve problems. We, historically, haven't done that. When there's a problem, we try to solve it.
Check out the hook while my DJ revolves it.
Taxing the rich has been tried before. In Maryland, they lost money.
It was supposed to bring in $106 million.
That's right.
What happened?
They lost $257 million. Surprise.
Well, I'm surprised.
Nobody should be surprised. They're out of here. These people aren't stupid.
Europe axed its wealth taxes because millionaires just left.
The ultra-progressive European states that our left admire have tried all this stuff and it doesn't work. In fact, the extent to which our left in America is deeply, fundamentally dishonest about taxes and the United States and who pays their fair share is so deep and so profound that it is shocking. One of the least appreciated facts of our politics, and it will shock you if you haven't heard this, is that the United States of America has the most progressive tax system in the developed world, in the OECD, which is the group of countries that constitute the first world. The way to understand what that means is that in America, we fund our government on the backs of our wealthiest people more than Norway, than Scandinavia, than France, than Canada, than anyone else. But don't take my word for it or the Cato Institute. This is the Fraser Institute's most recent survey study. And so I actually asked Claude to create a visualization from this paper so I could just walk you through some of these things because they will shock you. Who really has the most progressive taxes? Number one, the most progressive. Now get ready for this. California and Texas. This is treating it at the state level and the province level. California is number one compared to other regions and areas, followed by Texas at number 4. Texas has no state income tax. But Texans are taxed at a more progressive rate, rich Texans pay a larger share of total tax burden than the rich people in Japan or in Quebec or Ontario or Paris. It's completely against everything you're told. But let's just look at the country level. Across 33 countries with no subnational categories, the US is number one, the most progressive tax system. And that's followed by Korea, Austria, Japan, and then Canada. But we are substantially more progressive than Canada, and then much more progressive than the rest of Europe. If you don't understand this, if you aren't honest about this, then you're just not an honest dealer. And as a dad, as a mom, as a Joe Q citizen, there's no reason for you to know about this stuff. If you're somebody like Robert Reich or Zohran Mamdani or Elizabeth Warren, who's decided that it's your job to try to make this argument, saying that the rich in America don't pay their fair share relative to other countries is simply lying. You're just lying to the public. That's the facts. We are substantially more soak the rich than Italy, than Ireland, than Sweden. Notice that Sweden is very, very far down the line when it comes to progressive taxation. And why is that? How could this be possible? Don't these countries have larger safety nets than the US? How are they funding it all if they're not soaking the rich? Well, it turns out that you can't do that because the rich, A, are mobile and smart with their money and have good lawyers. But B, there's just actually not enough money there on an annual basis to run the gargantuan state that these countries have built, largely by not having militaries and being sort of vassal states of the global US hegemon. The way they do it is by taxing everybody a lot. The peak marginal tax rates in these countries start sometimes below $100,000. Everyone in the country pays up to 25% sales taxes. These are what is called regressive taxation, or tax everybody to pay everybody else. It reminds me of Frederick Bastiat saying that the state is the fiction by which each of us seeks to live at the expense of all of us. It is a kind of illusion. It's a word game. It's the we game. It's the collective ownership game. If everyone owns something, nobody does. And if everybody else has to pay for you, well, you're paying too in one way or another, usually with your freedom and prosperity. So how did we get here? How did we get to a place where we run massive fiscal deficits and our left is actually unwilling to introduce the kind of tax system that the countries they came to care about use, which is value-added tax? I'm not saying we should do that. We shouldn't do that. But they won't do it. They will say, just like Kathy Holcomb did, that, well, the rich don't pay their fair share, and I want to cut taxes on the middle class. That's not European welfare statism, folks. It's not. I don't know what that is. It's just a lie. It's a scam. You know, we have a history of battling with taxes in this country, and on this 250th anniversary, I like to go back to our history from time to time.
A poor tax choice by a government can and has resulted in rebellions. Let's go to the thought bubble. One tax rebellion you've probably heard of is the American Revolution. After the 7 Years' War ended in 1763, Great Britain had a huge debt to pay off. It needed to raise revenue from somewhere and look toward the colonists in America. In 1764, the British Parliament started taxing molasses sales. In 1765, they enacted the Stamp Act, which added taxes to paper and legal documents. Colonists grew more and more frustrated with British officials, both with tax policies and other interventions. Anyway, you know how it goes. No taxation without representation, Boston Tea Party, a big war, the French get involved, and we end up with a free America.
And then things start to change. And as they often do, they change in large part because of wars. Just like the taxation against the American colonists was needed to finance past wars by the British, so too did ours.
The IRS, or really its predecessor, was created around the time of the Civil War. Prior to the Civil War, all taxation in the United States, at least at the federal level, consisted of external taxes, specifically tariffs. And we had a system in place for administering those tariffs that involved customs officials at ports of entry and so on. In order to finance the Civil War, Congress enacted a series of what we sometimes refer to as internal taxes, property taxes, income taxes, and excise taxes imposed inside the United States on goods, services, people, etc., that were already here. Consequently, we needed a different bureaucracy in order to administer those taxes. So the predecessor of the Internal Revenue Service was created. Even though we repealed many of those internal taxes shortly after the end of the Civil War, we left that bureaucracy in place to administer the internal taxes that remained, and the rest is history. Eventually, we adopted the 16th Amendment, we created the modern income tax, and the bureaucracy grew from there.
This is the story of the ratchet effect. Every intervention, every new structure creates all kinds of reasons why it almost never goes away. Every new bureaucracy, every new tax scheme just gets baked into the bureaucratic bloat of the system until we end up with the 16th Amendment. So the 16th Amendment is ratified in 1913, and Woodrow Wilson passes the Revenue Act that same year that institutes the first income tax. So as soon as it's possible to have an income tax under the Constitution, good old Woodrow Wilson puts it into action, and he applies the same logic that we're hearing, from our modern friends. It's only going to be 1%. It's only for the richest of the rich. Again, just to recap, this is what they say.
Our vision to tax the top 1% of New Yorkers. These are New Yorkers who make $1 million a year or more.
That's it. Just the top 1%.
It's a 2-cent tax on every dollar someone has after they hit the $50 million mark.
This is the line. But immediately after the passage of the first income tax post 16th Amendment, in 1918, so just 5 years later, that 1% tax is hiked to 77%. And that is, of course, to fund World War I. That is what this is. That is how this goes. That is how all of these things go. And if you really want to see some silly stuff, you should head over to the IRS, where they've created these ridiculous apps for kids, I guess, for teachers to explain the way your taxes work. You've got these little questionnaires, and one of them includes a set of questions that, when you're trying to answer them, are kind of strange, like this one, number 3. IRS publications state that the tax system is voluntary, true or false? Followed by, I don't agree with the tax laws, so I don't have to pay what I owe. Isn't that also true? Because if it's voluntary, is it true? Well, let's see. Let's find out. It turns out, of course, that the IRS does say it's voluntary, and you will go to jail if you don't pay them. Because the IRS, in Orwellian newspeak, has a very particular version of voluntary when it comes to taxes. Namely, that it's a system of compliance that relies on individual citizens to report their income freely and voluntarily, calculate their tax liability correctly, and file a tax return on time. And if they don't do all that stuff voluntarily, they go to jail. And I know it's sort of a trope for libertarian types to talk about government being the gun and everything government doing basically being a gun pointed at your head. My wife, Lisa, always rolls her eyes when I say things like this, except that the IRS buys a lot of bullets. Here's one article that the IRS, according to a 2018 Government Accountability Office report, had more than 5 million rounds of ammo just for the IRS. That's 2,500 rounds for each armed IRS agent. I mean, I don't even understand how that's possible. And then earlier that year, between March and June, the IRS purchased another $700,000 worth of ammo. One of the things that remains amazing to me, and I come back to this again and again for a reason, because I don't want to be a political partisan. I would like for us to have 2 viable parties in this country in terms of ideology, ideas, especially around economics, because economics is really important. And we used to. In fact, JFK, famed Democrat, Prince of Camelot, when it comes to tax policy, sounds like a Republican today. But don't take my word for it. Just listen to his address on his income tax cut plan to spur the economy.
Worst deficit comes from a recession. And if we can take the proper action in the proper time, this can be the most important step we could take to prevent another recession. That is the right kind of a tax cut, both for your family budget and the national budget, resulting from a permanent basic reform and reduction in our rate structure. A creative tax cut, creating more jobs and income, and eventually more revenue. Such a bill will be presented to the Congress for action next year. It will include an across-the-board, top-to-bottom cut in both corporate and personal income taxes. It will include long-needed tax reforms that logic and equity demand. The billions of dollars this bill will place in the hands of the consumer and our businessmen will have both immediate and permanent benefits to our economy. Every dollar released from taxation that is spent or invested will help create a new job and a new salary. And these new jobs and new salaries can create other jobs and other salaries, and more customers and more growth for an expanding American economy.
Cutting taxes to raise revenue. Sounds downright Reaganite, right?
Mr. President, Harry Truman was out for his walk this morning, and he said he did not think we should have a tax cut until we get the budget balanced. And the other day, Senator Humphrey was saying in the Senate that what the American people think is true is very often more important than what actually is true. In view of all that, what do you think about cutting taxes while the budget is still in deficit?
The reason the government's in deficit is because you've got more than 4 million people unemployed. And because for the last 5 years, you've had rather a sluggish growth, much slower than any other Western country. I'm in favor of a tax cut because I'm concerned that if we don't get the tax cut, that we're going to have an increase in unemployment and that we may move into a period of economic downturn. We had a recession in 58, recession in 1960. We've done pretty well since then, but we still have over 4 million unemployed. And I think this tax cut can give the stimulus to our economy over the next 2 or 3 years. I think it will provide for greater national wealth. I think it will reduce unemployment. I think it will strengthen our gold position. So I think that the proposal we've made is responsible and in the best interest of the country.
And so here's the last graph for today, because it is one of the other things that is a fact that you need to contend with if you want to have an opinion that's not based on gobbledygook about taxes in America. And that is that what JFK did was true. So here I asked again to chart tax revenue of the federal government as a share of GDP. So just what does that mean? GDP, one way to look at what GDP is it's the sum total of all income earned in a year, actually. National income. There's two different measures, but they are basically the same thing. Gross domestic product and national income. And when you look at the history of taxes in America and tax rates on the wealthy, and how much revenue was being brought in at those tax rates, what you find is that everything you hear from modern progressives is just, as Joe Biden would say, complete malarkey. So here we are. The top tax rate swings wildly. Revenue as a share of GDP barely moves. That's the sort of AI summary, but here is the data, and the data is accurate. So you see that, you basically have, starting in 1913, very low taxation and also very low government spending. There is no welfare state. There is no New Deal. There is no Great Society. In the aftermath of World War I and then II, the Depression and the FDR's New Deal, we really see the step function with World War II. And then we basically stay in this zone. And so taxes go through the roof, and so does spending for the war. And then we come out of it, and we are in this new era, this post-war era of a much larger state, largely inflated by the war. And it remains there. In fact, people like John Galbraith were war planners and talked about how to plan the peace the way we planned the war. This was a very common phrase you'd hear among the brain trust of FDR. Plan for the peace. And so what does the peace have to tell us about taxes. Well, if I zoom in here a little bit, here is the peak. 94% marginal tax rate on the top earners. 94%. You only keep 6 cents out of every dollar. How much of national income did the federal government take in at 94% tax rate? 20%. 20%. That's how much money actually came in the door. It bounces around, it edges down. Kennedy cuts taxes to 70% for the top rate. That is in 1964. And as he predicted, tax revenues, which were then at around 16% of GDP, actually went up as a share and as a total. So came back up to 19, still lower than 94%. We keep trundling along around 16 to 18% of GDP and enter the era of Ronald Reagan, 50%, 50 marginal tax rate. Notice nothing's changing very much. We have a series of reforms that bring marginal tax rates down to 28%, 1986. And we basically stay in this same band here, between 17 and 18% of GDP. Bill Clinton bumps it back up a little bit to 39% for the top tax bracket, adding complexity back after it was reduced. And we see somewhat of a peak, though only matched by World War II, in the year 2000. And ever since, we have once again bounced around between 15 and 20%. Bush cuts taxes back to 35 while leaving the rest of the rates largely in place. No meaningful impact. What you really see is, as JFK said, incomes tank during recessions. Obama restores that top rate back to the Clinton era. And then, of course, Donald Trump in 2018 cuts it back down to 37. And we linger around here to this day. The notion that you can hike taxes on the rich to 90%, 99%, and have it make some meaningful impact on revenues for our government is just an empirical falsehood. We have had this, we have tried this, we have done this for a long time, for the better part of a century. And Americans just aren't going to pay much more than 20% of total income to Uncle Sam. Why didn't that work? Why didn't 90% tax rates produce higher revenue than 28% tax rates? At some level, it just seems crazy. Art Laffer explains it pretty simply, and it's worth hearing him out just so you understand the most basic heuristic going on here.
The Laffer curve is the relationship between tax rates and total tax revenues. And by the way, I did not name it the Laffer curve, and it's been around for centuries and centuries. In fact, the first reference to it I really know is in the Muqaddimah. In 1381, Ibn Khaldun described it this way: at the beginning of dynasties, tax rates are low and revenues are high. At the end of dynasties, tax rates are high and revenues are low. That's the sort of logic behind it. But let me, if I can, say, how much would you work if you were taxed at 100%? So that every time you go to the office, instead of getting a check, you get a bill. Obviously, you wouldn't work at all, and there'd be no work, but also the tax revenues would be zero. Now, that's this point right here on the Laffer curve. At 100% tax rates, no one will find there's any incentive whatsoever to work. They won't work, and tax revenues will be zero as well.
And as you can see, at zero rates, of course, if you're not collecting taxes, tax revenues are zero. So there's some point between 0 and 100, and it's not really close to 100. It's not 90. It's not 70. The disincentive effect of the tax isn't so great that people don't want to work. We obviously have taxes and people work. I work, you work, most people work. We pay our taxes. The incentives are there. The disincentives are there. But within a certain reason, they aren't so bad that you don't go to work. Of course, you have to feed yourself, so there's that. But if you're not going to get any income because it's at 90%, well, then why? You're not going to feed yourself anyway. So this is the basic premise. There is a sweet spot which defines the maximum amount of tax revenue that's feasible given changes in human behavior. The other factor, historically, is that people simply change the way they work and the way to avoid the taxes legally. There is always ways around it. One of the things people did was not take compensation in the form of normal income, or invest money in weird asset classes that weren't taxed in the same way, like livestock, even though you weren't a cattleman, stuff like that. That was rampant during the era of 90% tax rates. And this is why this soak the rich scam just can't work. You'd need to institute something so totalitarian that the IRS might actually start using those 3,000 bullets per agent on the public to try to enforce it. And maybe, I hope that's not why they're buying all those bullets, but I don't know why they are, and neither do you. Milton Friedman fundamentally has the answer for how to think about taxes, and that is to not think about taxes at all.
Keep your eye on one thing and one thing only, how much government is spending, because that's the true tax. Every budget is balanced. There is no such thing as an unbalanced federal budget. You're paying for it. If you're not paying for it through it in the form of explicit taxes, you're paying for it indirectly in the form of inflation or in the form of borrowing. The thing you should keep your eye on is what government spends. And the real problem is to hold down government spending as a fraction of our income. And if you do that, you can stop worrying about the debt.
I would add on to that just one thing. As you've seen throughout this video and heard from all these politicians, you always need to be in favor of lower taxes, always. And the reason is they will never put the money towards the deficit, ever. You heard it themselves. They immediately list all the new programs, even though they're running massive deficits. Every new dollar that comes into the government gets wasted. It gets spent poorly. It gets spent on $30 million grocery stores in New York City, or $200 billion in fraud in California running hospice care in Los Angeles. Nobody spends other people's money as well as they spend their own. That's the reason why no one washes rental cars. This is why communism can't work, because we don't have the incentive to care for things that aren't ours. It goes back to the most simple stuff we learn as kids, mine. And no, it's not selfishness. It's called stewardship. When you have ownership, you become the steward of that resource. You have something to lose if you screw up when it's yours. That's why wealth taxes are so devious, because they call into question what's really yours. And when you don't know if it's yours, you won't take care of it as well as if you know for sure that it is. And those are just inescapable facts of human nature and reality. And we need to teach these to our kids. We need to remind ourselves, because the entire political system and certainly the education system doesn't teach any of this stuff and doesn't level with the American people. So that's what I try to do here. This is especially libertarian because it's tax week, and so I'm going to be super libertarian because I don't like taxes. I don't like paying them, even though I do, because they're not voluntary at all. But let me know what you think. Did you learn something new here? Is this all old news, you fellow free marketeers in my audience? Let me know in the comments down below. Head over to dadsavesamerica.com where we'll put links to all this stuff. And of course, if you want to support us, you can buy merch from the store, like this awesome mug. You can also donate, because we are actually a nonprofit organization. These are educational for a reason. And so you can head over to our website to find out more about how you can do that. And of course, I hope you have a great weekend.